In the spring of 1035, a young Norman knight stood on a hilltop in southern Italy and looked down at a land that was not his. Below him, the Apulian plain stretched toward the Adriatic, dry, golden, shimmering in the heat. Olive groves lined the roads. Walled towns sat on distant ridges like teeth in a broken jaw. Somewhere to the south, the mountains of Calabria rose into haze. Somewhere beyond that, across a narrow strait of turquoise water, lay Sicily, an island ruled by Muslim emirs who had held it for 2 centuries and showed no sign of leaving. The knight's name was William. He was called Bras de Fer, Iron Arm, and he was the eldest of a set of brothers who would, within a single generation, tear this entire world apart and reassemble it under their family's banner. He had come from Normandy with almost nothing: a horse, a sword, a handful of followers, and a surname that meant nothing outside a small village on the Cotentin Peninsula, Hauteville. The Hauteville family is one of the most extraordinary stories in medieval history, and it begins with a problem so ordinary it is almost comic. Tancred de Hauteville was a minor Norman lord, not a duke, not a count, barely even a baron. His estate was small, his name was obscure, but his fertility was legendary. By 2 wives, Tancred produced 12 sons. 12. In a society where the eldest son inherited everything and the rest inherited nothing, 12 sons was not a blessing, it was a crisis. The first 5 sons, William, Drogo, Humphrey, Geoffrey, and Serlo, were born to Tancred's first wife, Muriel. They grew up in a household that could not support them. There was not enough land, there was not enough money, there was not enough room. So they did what landless Norman sons did. They left. One by one, starting around 1035, the Hauteville brothers traveled south, across France, over the Alps, and down the Italian peninsula to seek their fortune in the only market that valued their skills: the market for violence. Southern Italy in the early 11th century was a masterpiece of political chaos. 3 powers competed for control, and none of them was strong enough to win. The Lombard principalities, Capua, Benevento, Salerno, Amalfi, were the remnants of the old Germanic kingdom that had ruled Italy before Charlemagne. They were wealthy, cultured, and perpetually at war with each other. The Byzantine Empire controlled Apulia and Calabria through a network of governors and garrisons, clinging to the last fragments of Roman authority in the west. And the Muslim Emirate of Sicily, based in Palermo, dominated the island and raided the southern Italian coast with impunity. None of these powers trusted the others. All of them needed soldiers. And into this vacuum of mutual hostility walked the Normans, small bands of professional warriors arriving from the north in groups of 20, 50, 100, offering their swords to whoever would pay. The first Normans in Italy arrived not as conquerors, but as pilgrims. Around the year 1000, the date is uncertain, a group of Norman knights returning from a pilgrimage to Jerusalem stopped in southern Italy and were recruited by a Lombard prince to fight the Muslims. They were good at it. Word traveled back to Normandy. More came. Within a decade, Norman mercenaries were a permanent feature of southern Italian warfare, hired by Lombards against Byzantines, by Byzantines against Muslims, by everyone against everyone else. They fought for pay, for plunder, and for the chance to carve out something of their own. William Iron Arm was the first Hauteville brother to make his mark. In 1038, he joined a Byzantine expedition to reconquer Sicily from the Muslims. The campaign failed, but William distinguished himself so dramatically in battle, killing the emir of Syracuse in single combat, according to one account, that the Norman mercenaries chose him as their leader. By 1042, William had seized the city of Melfi in Apulia and declared himself count. He had arrived with nothing. Within 7 years, he had a title, a fortress, and an army. William died in 1046.
His brother Drogo succeeded him. Drogo was murdered in 1051. His brother Humphrey succeeded him. Humphrey died in 1057. And then the youngest and most dangerous of Tancred's first set of sons stepped forward. His name was Robert, and the Italians gave him a surname that stuck, Guiscardo, the cunning, Robert Guiscard. Robert Guiscard arrived in Italy around 1047 with 5 mounted knights and 30 foot soldiers. That was his entire army. He had no money, no title, no allies, and no reputation beyond being another hungry Hauteville looking for land. Within 20 years, he would be the most powerful man in southern Italy, recognized by the Pope as Duke of Apulia, Calabria, and Sicily, feared by the Byzantine emperor, and dreaded by every Italian prince from Rome to the tip of the boot.
The chronicles describe Robert as tall, broad-shouldered, blonde, loud, and terrifying. The Byzantine princess Anna Komnena, who had reason to hate him, nonetheless wrote that his appearance was enough to make strong men tremble, and that his laugh, a booming, careless roar, could be heard across a battlefield. He was charming when charm was useful, and brutal when brutality was required, and he seemed to know instinctively which tool each situation demanded. Robert's method was simple and devastatingly effective. He began as a bandit, literally. In his first years in Italy, he operated from a hilltop fortress in Calabria, raiding Byzantine supply lines, ambushing merchant caravans, and extorting protection money from local villages. He was a Norman lord playing Viking, stripping the countryside of everything portable and using the proceeds to attract more fighters to his banner. As his warband grew, his targets grew with it. He attacked towns, then fortresses, then entire provinces. Each victory brought more men, more revenue, more territory. The machine fed itself, just as the Viking raids had fed themselves 2 centuries earlier on the rivers of France. But Robert Guiscard was no mere raider. He understood something that separated him from every other petty warlord in Italy, the power of legitimacy. In 1059, he traveled to the papal court and made a deal with Pope Nicholas II that changed the political map of southern Italy. The Pope, locked in a bitter struggle with the Holy Roman Emperor over the right to appoint bishops, needed a military ally. Robert needed a title that would transform him from a bandit into a sovereign. The deal was struck at the Council of Melfi. Robert swore loyalty to the papacy and promised to defend the church with his sword. In return, the Pope recognized him as Duke of Apulia, Calabria, and, critically, Sicily. The island was still in Muslim hands. The Pope was granting Robert a title to a place he had not yet conquered, a license to take it in God's name. It was a stroke of genius on both sides. The Pope got a weapon, Robert got a mandate, and the conquest of Sicily, which would take 30 years of grinding, brutal warfare, had its legal and spiritual foundation. Robert's younger brother Roger led the Sicilian campaign. Roger de Hauteville was quieter than Robert, more patient, less theatrical, but equally ruthless when the situation required it. He crossed the Strait of Messina in 1061 with a small force and began the slow, methodical reduction of Muslim Sicily, fortress by fortress, valley by valley, year by year. Messina fell first, then the interior, then the coastal towns. The campaign was not a crusade in the later sense. Roger was as happy to negotiate with Muslim lords as to fight them, and he frequently enlisted Muslim soldiers in his own army. But it was a war of conquest nonetheless, and it was fought with the characteristic Norman combination of military skill, political cunning, and religious justification. Palermo, the island's capital and largest city, fell in January 1072. Roger and Robert entered together, riding through streets that had been Muslim for over 200 years. The city's mosques were not destroyed. Its Muslim population was not expelled. Roger understood what many conquerors never learn, that a functioning city is worth more than a ruined one, and that the people who know how to run it are more valuable than the soldiers who took it. The Arabs of Palermo were allowed to keep their property, their religion, and their administrative roles. They would serve the new Norman masters, and they would serve them well. But we are getting ahead of ourselves, because while the Hauteville brothers were dismantling southern Italy and rebuilding it in their image, something far more dramatic was brewing across the Channel. Return to Normandy. The year is 1066, and a bastard is about to become a king. William was born around 1028, the illegitimate son of Robert I, Duke of Normandy, and a woman named Herleva, a tanner's daughter according to the most persistent tradition. His father acknowledged him, named him heir, and then died on pilgrimage to Jerusalem in 1035, leaving the duchy in the hands of a 7-year-old boy with no legal right to the title and no powerful family to protect him. What followed was a decade of chaos. Norman barons who had submitted to Robert saw no reason to obey his bastard child. 3 of William's guardians were murdered in quick succession. The boy grew up surrounded by treachery, violence, and the constant awareness that his life could end at any moment if the wrong lord decided he was more trouble alive than dead. He slept in peasant houses. He was smuggled from castle to castle by loyal retainers who stayed one step ahead of assassination plots. He learned before he was old enough to shave that power was not given, it was taken, and it was held only by those willing to kill for it. By the time William reached his 20s, he had crushed the major rebellions against his rule, defeated an invasion by the French king at the Battle of Val-les-Dunes in 1047, and established himself as one of the most formidable military commanders in Europe. He was not loved, he was feared. He was stocky, enormously strong, and possessed of a temper that could turn a council chamber into a place of terror. But he was also patient, he planned carefully. He calculated odds, and he waited, sometimes for years, for the right moment to strike. The right moment came on January 5th, 1066, when Edward the Confessor, King of England, died without a clear heir. What happened next is one of the most contested sequences of events in medieval history, and the Norman and English sources disagree on almost every detail. But the broad outline is this. Edward had no children. The English Witan, the Council of Great Lords, chose Harold Godwinson, the most powerful earl in England, as king. Harold was crowned the very next day, with a haste that suggests he knew a challenge was coming.
William of Normandy claimed that Edward had promised him the throne years earlier, during a visit to the English court. He further claimed that Harold himself had sworn an oath, on holy relics no less, to support William's succession during a visit to Normandy in 1064. Whether these claims were true, partially true, or entirely fabricated is a question historians have debated for nearly 1,000 years. What is certain is that William believed them, or chose to act as though he believed them, and that he used them to justify the most audacious military operation of the 11th century. William spent the spring and summer of 1066 building an invasion fleet. The scale was staggering. Hundreds of ships had to be constructed from scratch in the ports of Normandy, flat-bottomed transport vessels capable of carrying horses, heavy warships with raised platforms for archers, supply boats loaded with food, weapons, and the prefabricated timber components of portable castles. William recruited soldiers not only from Normandy, but from Brittany, Flanders, Maine, and as far afield as southern Italy. Normans hiring Normans, the diaspora converging for the greatest gamble of the age. He also secured something that Harold could not match: papal approval. William sent envoys to Rome and argued successfully that Harold was a perjurer who had broken a sacred oath. Pope Alexander II blessed the invasion and sent William a papal banner, a strip of consecrated cloth that transformed a feudal land grab into a holy war. When William's fleet sailed, it sailed under the sign of the cross.
The fleet launched in late September 1066. The timing was not William's first choice. He had been waiting for favorable winds since August. His army camped along the Norman coast, eating through supplies and growing restless. But the delay, which seemed like a disaster, turned into a gift. Because while William waited, Harold Godwinson was forced to deal with a second invasion. Harold Hardrada, king of Norway, one of the most feared warriors in the Viking world, had landed in northern England with a massive army, allied with Harold's own exiled brother, Tostig. Harold Godwinson marched north at astonishing speed and destroyed the Norwegian force at the Battle of Stamford Bridge on September 25th. Hardrada was killed. Tostig was killed. The Norwegian threat was eliminated in a single afternoon of savage fighting. But Harold's army was exhausted, and 3 days later, the wind changed. William landed at Pevensey on the southern coast of England on September 28, 1066. He met no resistance. Harold was 250 miles to the north, his best soldiers bloodied and tired from Stamford Bridge. William immediately began fortifying his position, building a motte and bailey castle, the Norman signature, and sending raiding parties into the surrounding countryside. He was not merely preparing for battle, he was provoking one. By ravaging the lands of Harold's own earldom of Wessex, William forced Harold to march south immediately before he could rest or gather reinforcements. Harold arrived in the vicinity of Hastings on the night of October 13. He had covered the distance from Yorkshire in roughly 2 weeks, a forced march of extraordinary speed that speaks to both his determination and his desperation. He positioned his army on Senlac Hill, a ridge about 6 miles northwest of Hastings, and formed the Shield Wall, the traditional Anglo-Saxon defensive formation, a dense line of men standing shoulder to shoulder, overlapping their shields to create a barrier of wood and iron. The morning of October 14, 1066, dawned cold and gray. William's army advanced uphill toward the English position. The Normans were organized in 3 divisions, Bretons on the left, Normans in the center, Flemish and French on the right, each consisting of infantry, archers, and heavy cavalry. William rode at the center, visible to both sides, wearing the papal banner and the relics of saints around his neck. The battle lasted all day. This alone was extraordinary. Most medieval engagements were decided in hours, sometimes minutes, but the English shield wall held. The Normans charged uphill again and again and were thrown back. The archers fired volleys that thudded into shields and accomplished little. The cavalry, the Normans' greatest weapon, could not break the line on the steep, muddy slope. By midday, the battle looked like a Norman defeat. What happened next is the turning point, not just of the battle, but of English history. The Norman left wing, the Breton contingent, broke and fled downhill. A section of the English line, against Harold's orders, charged after them, breaking formation to pursue the retreating enemy. The Normans wheeled and cut the pursuing English to pieces. William saw it happen, and he understood. The Normans began using feigned retreats, cavalry charges that turned into deliberate flights, luring sections of the English line to break formation and pursue, then turning and destroying the isolated groups. Whether this was planned from the beginning or improvised in the chaos of battle is disputed. What is not disputed is that it worked. Slowly, brutally, over the course of the afternoon, the English line thinned. As the sun began to drop toward the horizon, William ordered his archers to change their angle of fire, shooting in high arcs so that the arrows fell from above, over the top of the shield wall, into the faces of the men behind it. The shift was devastating. Harold's bodyguard, the Huscarls, the elite professional warriors who formed the core of the English army, began to fall, and then Harold himself was struck. The Bayeux Tapestry, that extraordinary 70-meter embroidered chronicle of the conquest,
created within a decade of the events it depicts, shows a figure labeled Harold Rex with an arrow in his eye. Whether Harold actually died from an arrow to the eye or was cut down by Norman knights who hacked him apart on the ground, or some combination of both, the sources disagree. What every source agrees on is this: by nightfall, Harold was dead, his brothers were dead, his army was destroyed, and William of Normandy stood on Senlac Hill as the uncontested master of England.
The battle had lasted roughly 9 hours. In those 9 hours, a civilization ended. The Anglo-Saxon world, its language, its laws, its aristocracy, its entire social order did not die on October 14, 1066, but it received a wound from which it would never recover. Within 5 years, almost every major landowner in England would be Norman. Within 20 years, the English language would be banished from the royal court, the law courts, and the church. Within a generation, the sons of the men who had stood in the shield wall would be serfs on land their fathers had owned. William was crowned King of England on Christmas Day, 1066, in Westminster Abbey. The ceremony was conducted in both French and English, a gesture of inclusion that fooled no one. When the congregation shouted their acclamation, the Norman guards outside the abbey mistook the noise for a riot and set fire to the surrounding buildings. The coronation of the new king took place to the smell of smoke and the sound of screams. It was, in hindsight, a fitting beginning. Meanwhile, in the south, Roger de Hauteville tightened his grip on Sicily. Palermo would fall 6 years later. Within a single generation, men from a strip of coastline in northern France controlled England, southern Italy, and the largest island in the Mediterranean. The conquests were complete. The map of Europe had been redrawn by a handful of families who shared a language, a fighting style, and a homeland smaller than most modern provinces. William was crowned on Christmas Day, 1066. Roger would take Palermo 6 years later. Within a single generation, men from a strip of coastline in northern France controlled England, southern Italy, and Sicily. But the real question was not how they won, it was what winning cost and what it built. Conquest is not the same as victory. Victory is a moment, a flag raised, a king crowned, an army broken on a hillside at dusk. Conquest is what comes after, the long, grinding, unglamorous work of replacing one world with another. And it is in the aftermath, not the battle, that the true nature of the conqueror is revealed. The Normans won their battles with extraordinary speed, but what they did with their victories, how they governed, what they destroyed, what they built, and what they accidentally created, is the part of the story that actually changed history. Because the Normans did not simply occupy the lands they took, they restructured them. They reached into the foundations of each conquered society and rearranged the load-bearing walls, and the buildings they erected on those new foundations are in many cases still standing. Start with England, because the transformation there was the most total and the most violent. William the Conqueror did not arrive in England with a plan to replace the entire Anglo-Saxon ruling class. He arrived with a plan to become king and to reward the men who had helped him win. But resistance forced his hand. In the months after Hastings, English lords across the country refused to submit. Rebellions flared in the north, the west, and the Midlands. Edgar the Atheling, the last male heir of the old Anglo-Saxon royal line, became a rallying point for resistance. The northern earls invited a Danish invasion force, which seized York in 1069. William marched north to meet it. What followed was one of the most deliberately destructive campaigns in medieval European history. William did not simply defeat the northern rebels. He annihilated the region's capacity to resist ever again.
His army swept through Yorkshire, Durham, and the surrounding counties in the winter of 1069-1070, burning villages, slaughtering livestock, destroying grain stores, and breaking every plow they could find. The purpose was not to punish individuals. The purpose was to kill the land itself. Without crops, without animals, without seed grain for the next planting, the population could not eat. Without food, it could not rebel. The chronicler Orderic Vitalis, himself half Norman and generally sympathetic to William, described the harrying of the North with undisguised horror. He wrote that more than 100,000 people died, from starvation, from exposure, from the violence of the campaign itself. The number is almost certainly exaggerated, but the scale of the devastation is not. The Domesday Book, compiled 16 years later in 1086, recorded vast tracts of Yorkshire as waste, land so thoroughly destroyed that it had not recovered in nearly 2 decades. Villages that had been thriving communities in 1065 were listed as empty. Fields that had supported hundreds of families were recorded as worthless. The north of England did not fully recover for a generation. This was not collateral damage, this was policy. William understood a principle that every empire builder eventually learns. The cost of rebellion must be so catastrophic that no one dares attempt it twice. The harrying of the North was England's lesson, and England learned it. With resistance broken, William proceeded to the real work of conquest, the redistribution of power. And here, the scale of what he did becomes almost incomprehensible. By 1086, 20 years after Hastings, the entire landholding structure of England had been replaced. The Domesday Book, that remarkable survey of every manor, every field, every mill, every pig in the kingdom, tells the story in cold numbers. In 1066, the land of England was held by roughly 4,000 Anglo-Saxon lords. By 1086, virtually all of it, something approaching 95%, was in the hands of Norman, Breton, and Flemish lords who had crossed the Channel with William or arrived in the years after. The Anglo-Saxon aristocracy did not decline, it ceased to exist. The Domesday Book itself was an instrument of this transformation. Nothing like it had ever been attempted in medieval Europe. William sent commissioners to every county in England with orders to record who held each piece of land, what it was worth, what it had been worth before the conquest, how many plows it supported, how many people lived on it, how much livestock it contained, and what taxes were owed. The survey was so thorough and so intrusive that the English called it the Book of Judgment, Doomsday, because, like the last judgment of God, there was no appeal from its verdict. This was not mere accounting. This was the invention of a new relationship between the king and the land. In Anglo-Saxon England, land ownership had been a complex web of local custom, inherited right, and personal obligation. In Norman England, it was simplified to a single principle. All land belongs to the king. Every lord holds his estate as a grant from the crown in exchange for military service. The king can revoke the grant. The king can redistribute the land. The king is not merely the most powerful lord, he is the source of all legitimate ownership. This principle, that sovereignty resides in the crown, not in custom or inheritance, was the most radical thing the Normans brought to England. It was more important than the cavalry charge. It was more important than the castles. It was the foundation on which every subsequent English king would build, and it remains embedded in English law to this day. When the British Crown claims ownership of all land in the United Kingdom, a legal fiction that still technically holds, it is repeating a claim that William the Conqueror made in the winter of 1066. And then were the castles. The Anglo-Saxons had fortified towns, burhs, with earthen ramparts and wooden palisades.
But they did not have castles in the Norman sense, private fortifications built by individual lords to dominate specific territories. William introduced them immediately. The Tower of London was begun within weeks of the coronation. Windsor followed, then castles at Warwick, Nottingham, York, Lincoln, Cambridge, Huntingdon, a chain of stone and timber fortresses stretching across the country like a net thrown over a captured animal. The castles were not built to defend England from foreign invasion. They were built to defend the Normans from the English. Each castle was a statement of occupation, a physical declaration that this land was now held by a new master, and that the new master did not trust his subjects. The Motte and Bailey design, the same design the Normans had used in Normandy for generations, was perfectly suited to the task. A motte could be raised in weeks using forced English labor. A timber keep on top gave the lord a defensible refuge. A bailey at the base housed his garrison. The whole structure could control a town, a river crossing, a road junction, or an entire county with a garrison of fewer than 50 men. The psychological impact was immense. Imagine being an English farmer in, say, Warwickshire in the year 1068. Last year, you paid your taxes to an English lord who spoke your language, followed your customs, and worshipped in a church built by your grandfather. This year, a Norman knight has arrived with 20 armed men, commandeered the hilltop above your village, and forced you and your neighbors to dig a ditch and pile earth into a mound 40 feet high. On top of the mound, his men are building a wooden tower. From that tower, he can see your house, your fields, your livestock, everything you own. He speaks a language you cannot understand. He eats food you have never tasted. He answers to a king you did not choose. And if you resist, if you so much as refuse to dig, you have seen what happened to Yorkshire. This is what conquest feels like from below. Not the thunder of cavalry, not the glory of banners, but the slow, humiliating realization that your world has been stolen and there is nothing you can do about it. The language changed too, and the change cut deeper than any sword. Norman French became the language of the English court, the law courts, the church hierarchy, and the aristocracy. English, Old English, the language of Beowulf and the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, was demoted to the language of peasants, servants, and the lower clergy. For roughly 300 years, the rulers of England spoke one language and the ruled spoke another. The two tongues existed in a state of rigid hierarchy. French was the language of power, English the language of labor.
The consequences of this linguistic apartheid are still audible in modern English. The animals in the field kept their English names, cow, sheep, pig, deer, because it was English-speaking peasants who tended them. But the same animals, once they reached the Norman lord's table, acquired French names: beef, mutton, pork, venison. The pattern repeats across the vocabulary of power. English gave us house, French gave us mansion. English gave us freedom, French gave us liberty. English gave us doom, French gave us justice. English gave us kingly, French gave us royal. Every time you use a word of French origin to describe authority, law, governance, or social status, you are speaking the language of the conqueror. Every time you use a word of English origin to describe manual labor, farming, or domestic life, you are speaking the language of the conquered. The class structure of 1066 is embedded in the dictionary. But the Normans did not merely impose. In the long run, they merged, and the language that emerged from 3 centuries of coexistence, Middle English and eventually Modern English, was richer, more flexible, and more expressive than either Old English or Norman French alone. It was a language with 2 words for almost everything, one Germanic and one Romance, each carrying a slightly different shade of meaning. begin and commence, ask and demand, wish and desire, help and aid. This doubling gave English an enormous vocabulary and a tonal range that few other European languages can match. It is, in a sense, the most lasting and most democratic legacy of the conquest, a language shaped equally by the powerful and the powerless, by the men who built the castles and the men who dug the ditches. Now turn south to Sicily, and the picture changes completely. If the Norman conquest of England was a story of replacement, one ruling class violently substituted for another, the Norman conquest of Sicily was a story of absorption. And the difference reveals something essential about the Norman character. They did not have a fixed ideology, they had a method, and a method adapted to circumstances. Roger de Hauteville completed the conquest of Sicily in 1091, 30 years after the first Norman forces crossed the Strait of Messina. It had been a long, grinding campaign, not a single dramatic battle like Hastings, but decades of siege warfare, negotiation, betrayal, and slow territorial accumulation. By the time it was finished, Roger controlled an island that was unlike anything else in medieval Europe. Sicily in the 11th century was one of the most culturally complex places on Earth. The Arab conquest of the 9th century had transformed it into a thriving outpost of Islamic civilization. Palermo, with a population of perhaps 300,000, was larger than London and Paris combined. Its markets sold silk, spices, gold, and paper, a technology the Arabs had brought from the East that Europe had not yet adopted. Its mosques were famous across the Muslim world. Its scholars translated Greek philosophy into Arabic math and Arabic mathematics into practical engineering. The island also had a substantial Greek-speaking Christian population, remnants of the Byzantine period, who maintained their own churches, their own liturgy, and their own traditions. And it had Jewish communities that had existed since Roman times, serving as merchants, doctors, and translators.
Roger did not destroy this world, he sat on top of it. The Norman Kingdom of Sicily, formally established by Roger's son, Roger II, in 1130, was medieval Europe's most improbable political experiment. Its king was a Latin Christian who employed Muslim soldiers, patronized Greek scholars, and conducted diplomacy in Arabic. Its administration was run by a mix of Norman knights, Arab bureaucrats, and Greek clerks. Its coinage bore inscriptions in Latin, Greek, and Arabic. Its capital, Palermo, had Christian churches with Islamic architectural details, Muslim mosques that continued to function under Christian rule, and a royal palace where the king received ambassadors in robes embroidered with Arabic calligraphy. The Cappella Palatina, the royal chapel in Palermo, built by Roger II in the 1130s, is the physical embodiment of this fusion. Stand inside it today, and you are standing at the intersection of three civilizations. The walls are covered in Byzantine gold mosaics. Christ Pontocrator stares down from the apse with enormous, hypnotic eyes. The ceiling is carved in muqarnas, the honeycomb vaulting technique developed in Islamic architecture, here executed by Arab craftsmen imported from North Africa. The floor is laid in opus sectile, intricate geometric patterns of cut marble in the Roman tradition. Latin inscriptions run alongside Greek and Arabic. The effect is overwhelming, not a collision of cultures, but a conversation conducted in stone and gold and colored glass. How did the Normans, of all people, a warrior aristocracy from rainy northern France, create the most tolerant, multicultural kingdom in medieval Europe? The answer is not that they were enlightened. The answer is that they were practical. Roger and his successors understood that Sicily's wealth depended on the skills and labor of its diverse populations. Expel the Muslims, and you lost the farmers who maintained the irrigation systems,
the merchants who ran the trade networks, and the craftsmen who produced the luxury goods that made the kingdom rich. Marginalize the Greeks, and you lost the administrators who knew how to run a Mediterranean bureaucracy. Persecute the Jews, and you lost the translators and doctors whose skills no one else could match. So the Normans kept everyone. They taxed everyone. They ruled everyone. And they allowed everyone, within limits, to live according to their own customs. It was not tolerance in the modern liberal sense. It was tolerance as a management strategy, the recognition that a functioning multi-ethnic economy is more valuable than a purified but impoverished monoculture.
This pragmatic pluralism produced extraordinary results. The court of Roger II became one of the great intellectual centers of the 12th century. The Arab geographer Ali Idrisi created the most accurate map of the known world at Roger's commission, a silver planisphere accompanied by a book of geography that remained the standard reference for centuries. Greek and Arabic texts were translated into Latin, feeding the intellectual awakening that would become the 12th century Renaissance. Norman Sicily was, for a brief and brilliant period, the place where the knowledge of the Islamic world met the ambitions of the Christian West. But there is a darker reading of this story, and intellectual honesty requires acknowledging it. The Norman tolerance of Sicily was always conditional. It existed at the pleasure of the king and could be, and eventually was, revoked. Muslim communities that resisted Norman rule were crushed with the same brutality the Normans showed in England. Forced conversions, while not systematic under the first generation of rulers, became more common under their successors. By the 13th century, the Muslims of Sicily had been expelled or forcibly converted, and the multicultural experiment was over. The tolerance was real, but it was fragile, and it depended entirely on the calculation of rulers who valued diversity only as long as it served their interests. This brings us to the deepest question about the Norman conquests, not what they won, but what they cost. And the cost was borne, as it almost always is, by the people at the bottom. In England, the cost was measured in dispossession, cultural erasure, and famine. In Sicily, it was measured in the slow erosion of Muslim autonomy, the gradual tightening of Christian supremacy, and the eventual extinction of a multicultural society that had existed for 2 centuries. In southern Italy, it was measured in the displacement of Lombard and Byzantine elites, the disruption of trade networks, and the imposition of a feudal system that concentrated wealth in the hands of a tiny Norman aristocracy.
The Normans built magnificent things: cathedrals, castles, legal systems, administrative structures, a language. But they built them on foundations of violence, expropriation, and the systematic destruction of whatever existed before. Every Norman church in England stands on ground that was taken from someone. Every Norman castle in Sicily casts a shadow over communities that were absorbed, diminished, or erased. This is not a moral judgment unique to the Normans. It is the nature of conquest itself. But it must be said, because the grandeur of what the Normans built can obscure the human cost of building it. The feudal system, which the Normans exported to every land they conquered, is the clearest example of this dual legacy. On one hand, feudalism provided structure. It created a chain of obligation from king to lord to knight to peasant that replaced the chaos of the post-Carolingian world with something resembling order. It gave land rights, conditional, revocable, but real, to men who had previously held power only through raw force. It created a framework for governance that could survive the death of any individual ruler, because the system of obligations outlived the men who made them. On the other hand, feudalism was a system of extraction. It existed to channel the labor of the many into the wealth of the few. The peasant at the bottom of the chain owed labor, crops, and obedience to the lord above him. The lord owed military service to the lord above him. And the king at the top owed nothing to anyone except God.
and God, conveniently, never collected. The system was stable precisely because it was oppressive. It worked because the people who bore its weight had no mechanism to resist it. The castle on the hill was not just a military structure, it was an argument made in stone that the current arrangement of power was permanent, natural, and unchallengeable. The Normans did not invent feudalism, but they perfected it, they standardized it, they exported it, and they enforced it with a consistency and a thoroughness that no previous ruling class had achieved. In this sense, the Norman conquests were not merely military events. They were the installation of a political operating system, a software upgrade for medieval governance that made kingdoms more efficient, more centralized, and more unequal, all at the same time.
And perhaps the most enduring legacy of all was not a system or a building, but a habit of mind. The Normans demonstrated more vividly than any other group in medieval history that power is not inherited, it is constructed. You build it with swords, with laws, with churches, with records, with languages, with stories. You build it by controlling not only the land, but the narrative, by commissioning tapestries that tell your version of events, by writing chronicles that cast your conquests as divine will, by building cathedrals so enormous that they seem to argue, simply by existing, that the men who built them must have been chosen by God. The Normans did not survive. Within 2 centuries, they were absorbed into the peoples they had conquered: English, French, Italian, Sicilian. But what they built did not disappear. It sank into the foundations. There is a moment, if you visit the right places at the right hour, when you can almost feel them. Stand in the nave of Durham Cathedral at dawn, before the tourists arrive, when the light comes through the east window and falls in pale columns onto the massive round pillars. The pillars are carved with deep geometric patterns, zigzags, diamonds, chevrons, cut into stone so hard it has not eroded in 900 years. The ceiling vaults overhead in a way that seems to defy the weight of the rock above it. The silence is enormous. The space was designed to make you feel small, and it succeeds. This cathedral was begun in 993, commissioned by a Norman bishop on a site that had been sacred to the English for centuries. The monks of Lindisfarne had carried the body of St. Cuthbert here, fleeing the Vikings. The Normans built over the shrine, not to destroy it, but to claim it. They placed their architecture on top of English sanctity, like a crown on a conquered head. Durham is not unique. Across England, across Normandy, across Sicily and southern Italy, the Normans left their signature in stone, and that stone still stands, still functions, still shapes the way people move through space and understand power. The ghosts are not hidden. They are the walls themselves. The Tower of London receives nearly 3 million visitors a year. Most of them come to see the crown jewels or the ravens or the spot where Anne Boleyn lost her head. Very few of them pause to consider that the White Tower, the pale, brooding keep at the center of the complex, is the oldest continuously occupied fortress in Europe, and that it was built by a foreign conqueror to terrorize the city it overlooks. William ordered its construction in 1066, immediately after his coronation. The stone was shipped from Caen in Normandy. William did not trust English stone, or perhaps he wanted the building itself to be Norman down to its molecules. The walls are 15 feet thick at the base. The windows are narrow slits designed for defense, not illumination. The entrance was originally on the 2nd floor, reachable only by an external staircase that could be pulled up in case of attack. It was not a palace. It was a fist, clenched in stone, placed at the edge of London as a permanent reminder of who was in charge. 9.5 centuries later, it is still there. The monarchy it was built to protect has survived civil wars, revolutions, world wars, and the slow erosion of royal authority into constitutional ceremony. The tower has been a fortress, a prison, a treasury, an armory, a zoo, and a tourist attraction. It has held kings, traitors, saints, and war criminals. It has witnessed executions, coronations, and casual daily cruelties of power exercised without accountability. Through all of it, the Norman stonework has endured. The walls William built have outlasted every dynasty that sheltered behind them. And the Tower is only the beginning. Windsor Castle, which William founded in the 1070s as one of a ring of fortifications around London, is today the oldest and largest inhabited castle in the world. The British royal family still lives there. When the Queen or the King is in residence, a flag flies from the round tower, built on top of the original Norman motte. The mound that William's soldiers raised with English labor in the 11th century is still the physical foundation of the British royal monarchy's most iconic home. The symbolism is almost too perfect. The power rests literally on a pile of dirt that conquered people were forced to heap up for their conquerors. Cross the Channel to Normandy, and the echoes are different but no less profound. Mont Saint-Michel rises from the tidal flats of the Norman coast like something from a dream or a hallucination. The abbey sits on a granite island that is alternately surrounded by sea and by vast expanses of wet sand, depending on the tide. The Normans did not build the original monastery, that dates to the 8th century, but they transformed it. In the 11th and 12th centuries, Norman abbots and their patrons expanded the complex into a fortress monastery of staggering ambition, piling building on top of building up the steep sides of the rock until the whole structure seemed to grow out of the island itself, as organic and as improbable as a coral reef. Mont Saint-Michel was never conquered, not by the English during the 100 Years' War when they held all of Normandy except this single island, not by the revolutionaries in 1789, who turned it into a prison but could not bring themselves to demolish it, not by the Germans in 1944, who occupied Normandy but left the abbey largely intact. There is something about the place that resists destruction, not mystically, but practically. It is too beautiful to tear down, it is too famous to ignore, and it is too Norman to forget.
The Abbey Church at the summit, rebuilt after a fire in 1203 but retaining its Norman bones, offers a view that stretches to the horizon in every direction, a panorama of sea and sand and sky that makes the political boundaries of nations seem trivial. The Normans chose this place because it was defensible, but they stayed because it was transcendent. They understood, as all great builders understand, that architecture is not merely functional, it is rhetorical. A building argues for the permanence of the people who built it, and the argument that Mont Saint-Michel makes that faith, ambition, and engineering can defy gravity, tide, and time is still persuasive after 1,000 years. Now fly south, cross the Alps, descend the Italian peninsula, take a boat across the Strait of Messina, and arrive in Palermo. The city today is loud, chaotic, sun-blasted, and magnificent. Its streets are a geological cross-section of Mediterranean history: Greek foundations, Roman columns, Arab arches, Norman towers, Baroque facades, and 20th century concrete layered on top of each other like the strata of an archaeological dig that no one has bothered to finish. The Norman layer is the one that surprises people. The Cathedral of Monreale, 6 kilometers outside Palermo, was built by William II of Sicily in the 1170s. It is, by any measure, one of the most extraordinary buildings in the world. The exterior is relatively plain, heavy stone walls in the Norman Romanesque tradition, with interlocking pointed arches along the apse that betray an Islamic influence so direct it looks like a quotation. But step inside and the building detonates. Every surface, every wall, every column, every arch, every inch of the apse and the nave and the transepts is covered in gold mosaic. 6,500 square meters of it.
The mosaics depict the entire narrative arc of the Bible, from the creation of the world to the resurrection of Christ, rendered in the Byzantine style by Greek craftsmen imported from Constantinople. Christ Pantocrator, the ruler of all, dominates the central apse, his face 20 meters high, his eyes following you wherever you stand. Below him, saints, prophets, and apostles process along the walls in shimmering gold robes. The light enters through high windows and ignites the gold, so that the entire interior seems to glow from within, as though the building itself is a source of illumination rather than merely a container for it.
This cathedral was built by the grandson of Roger II, the Norman king who had commissioned the Capella Palatina a generation earlier. It was built to rival the great churches of Constantinople and Rome. It was built, frankly, to show off, and it succeeded. 9 centuries later, visitors still stand in the nave of Monreal with their mouths open, unable to reconcile the plain stone exterior with the explosion of gold inside, unable to believe that this building exists in a small town on a Sicilian hillside rather than in the center of an empire. But Monreal is more than spectacle. It is evidence. Evidence that the Normans of Sicily had achieved something that no other medieval ruling class managed, a genuine synthesis of Latin, Greek, and Islamic artistic traditions, fused into a single aesthetic that belonged to none of its sources and surpassed all of them. The building is simultaneously a Romanesque church, a Byzantine mosaic gallery, and an Islamic architectural masterpiece. It should not cohere, it should feel like a collision, but it does not. It feels inevitable, as though these 3 traditions had been waiting for centuries to meet in exactly this room. That synthesis did not survive the Normans. When the Hohenstaufen Emperor Frederick II inherited the Sicilian crown in the early 13th century, the Emmer multicultural experiment was already fraying. Frederick, himself a product of the Norman Sicilian world, raised in Palermo, fluent in Arabic and Greek, maintained some of the old pluralism, but the pressures of Christian orthodoxy, papal politics, and anti-Muslim sentiment were mounting. After Frederick's death in 1520, the experiment collapsed. The Angevins who succeeded him persecuted the island's remaining Muslims. By the late 13th century, the Muslim communities of Sicily had been expelled, converted, or destroyed. The Arabic inscriptions in the royal palace were left on the walls, but the people who had written them were gone. This is the paradox that haunts every Norman legacy site, the beauty of what was built and the violence of the process that built it. You cannot separate the two. The gold mosaics of Monreal were funded by the taxation of a conquered population. The Tower of London was raised by the forced labor of a subjugated city. Durham Cathedral stands on a site that was sacred to the English and claimed by the Normans. Every stone is double-coated, a testament to human creativity and a monument to human domination.
But perhaps the most pervasive Norman legacy is the one you cannot see at all. It is not in any building. It is in the language you are hearing right now. English, the language of Shakespeare, of the King James Bible, of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, of approximately 1.5 billion speakers worldwide, is a Norman creation. Not entirely, of course. Its grammar is Germanic. Its basic vocabulary, the, is, and, to, of, in, it, that, is Anglo-Saxon. But its higher vocabulary, the words for law, government, justice, power, religion, art, literature, medicine, cuisine, fashion, and nearly every other domain of organized human activity is overwhelmingly French, Norman French. The numbers are staggering. Linguists estimate that between 40 and 60% of modern English vocabulary derives from French or Latin, much of it entering the language during the Norman period or in the centuries immediately after.
Words like parliament, court, judge, jury, plaintiff, defendant, crime, punishment, prison, fine, the entire vocabulary of the legal system are French. Words like government, sovereign, authority, minister, council, treaty, alliance, nation, the vocabulary of the state are French. Words like beauty, art, color, design, fashion, style, elegance, the vocabulary of aesthetics are French. The language of command is French. The language of obedience is English. This is not a coincidence. It is a scar. The linguistic structure of English preserves in fossil form the social structure of post-conquest England, a French-speaking ruling class issuing orders to an English-speaking population that had no choice but to comply. Over time, the two languages merged and the class distinction blurred, but the imprint remains. Every English speaker alive today carries the Norman conquest in their mouth every time they open it. And the reach of that language has carried the Norman imprint far beyond anything William or Roger could have imagined. When the British Empire spread English to North America, India, Australia, Africa, and Southeast Asia, it spread a language that was itself a product of conquest, a hybrid tongue born from the collision of Germanic peasants and French-speaking warlords on a rainy island in the 11th century. The Normans did not build the British Empire, but they built the language it spoke, and through that language, their influence radiates into every corner of the modern world.
There is one more artifact that deserves attention because it is, in its own way, the most Norman object in existence. The Bayeux tapestry is not actually a tapestry. It is an embroidery, a strip of linen cloth roughly 70 meters long and half a meter wide, stitched with colored wool thread in a technique that was common in English workshops of the 11th century. It was almost certainly commissioned by Bishop Odo of Bayeux, William's half-brother, within a decade of the conquest, and it was probably made by English women, the conquered, stitching the story of their own defeat. The tapestry tells the story of the conquest in a continuous visual narrative, a kind of medieval comic strip reading from left to right, with Latin captions identifying the characters and scenes. It begins with Edward the Confessor sending Harold to Normandy. It shows Harold's oath to William. It shows the death of Edward, the coronation of Harold, the building of the invasion fleet, the crossing of the Channel, and the Battle of Hastings. It ends, or rather it breaks off, because the final section has been lost, with the English fleeing the battlefield and Harold dead on the ground. It is propaganda. It tells William's version of events, not Harold's. It presents the conquest as the just punishment of a man who broke a sacred oath. It shows the Normans as disciplined warriors fighting under the banner of God. It shows the English as brave but doomed, their king a perjurer who brought destruction on his own people. The bias is clear, consistent, and unapologetic. And yet, the tapestry is also undeniably a masterpiece of visual storytelling. The stitching is precise, vivid, and surprisingly expressive. Horses gallop with their legs fully extended, ships pitch on embroidered waves, men die in contorted postures that convey pain with an economy a modern filmmaker would envy. The border, a strip running along the top and bottom of the main narrative, contains animals, mythological scenes, and, in the sections depicting the battle, naked corpses being stripped of their armor. The border does not comment on the main story, it haunts it. The tapestry has survived for nearly 1,000 years. It survived the French Revolution, when citizens of Bayeux used it to cover a military wagon, and it was rescued at the last moment by a local official. It survived the Second World War, when the Nazis considered transporting it to Berlin and were prevented by the Allied advance. It hangs today in a climate-controlled room in the Bayeux Museum, behind glass, in near darkness to protect the fragile threads from light. Visitors file past it in silence, reading the story of a conquest that happened in 1066 and that still, somehow, feels unfinished, because its consequences are still unfolding.
The Bayeux Tapestry is the most Norman object in existence because it embodies every quality that defined the Normans: ambition, violence, craftsmanship, narrative control, and the unshakable conviction that the story belongs to whoever has the power to tell it. The English women who stitched it were forced to create a monument to their own subjugation, and they did it so beautifully that the monument outlived the subjugation itself. So what remains? The Normans as a people are gone. They dissolved into the English, the French, the Italians, the Sicilians. By the 13th century, no one in England called themselves Norman anymore. The descendants of William's companions spoke English, married English spouses, and thought of themselves as English lords. In Sicily, the Norman royal line died out, and the island passed to German, French, and Spanish rulers who remembered the Normans only as a chapter in someone else's history. In Normandy itself, the duchy was eventually absorbed into the French crown, and the Normans became simply French, citizens of a nation that owed its very name to a different set of Franks. They left no nation, they left no continuous dynasty, they left no religion, no philosophy, no artistic movement that bears their name. In the usual sense of historical legacy, the way we speak of the Roman legacy, or the Greek legacy, or the Islamic legacy, the Normans left almost nothing. And yet they left everything. They left castles that still define the skylines of English cities. They left cathedrals that still function as houses of worship 9 centuries after their consecration. They left a legal tradition, the centralized, crown-based system of land tenure and royal justice that evolved into the common law, which today governs the lives of more than 2 billion people across the English-speaking world. They left a language that is spoken by a quarter of the human race. They left the idea that a small, disciplined, culturally flexible elite can seize control of a larger society and reshape it in its own image, an idea that every colonial power in history has, consciously or unconsciously, borrowed from the Norman playbook. And they left one more thing, something harder to quantify but impossible to ignore. They left a question. The question is this: what happens when a people with no fixed identity enter a world of fixed identities? What happens when the outsiders, the ones who do not belong, who were not invited, who arrived with nothing but weapons and ambition, prove more adaptable, more resilient, and more creative than the civilizations they conquer? The Normans were not Vikings. They were not French. They were not English or Italian or Sicilian. They were all of these things and none of them. They were a people defined not by where they came from, but by what they did when they arrived. They absorbed, they adapted, they built, and then they disappeared into their own creations, like architects who walk into the buildings they designed and never come out. There is a word in English, ambition, that comes from the Latin ambitio, meaning a going around, a canvassing for votes, a restless movement from place to place in search of power. The Normans would have understood that word instinctively, even before it entered their adopted language. Their entire history was a going around, from Scandinavia to France, from France to England, from France to Italy, from Italy to Sicily, always moving, always arriving, always building something on top of whatever they found. Today, the grass grows over their mottes. The stone of their castles has weathered to the color of old bone. The language they spoke, Norman French, that strange hybrid of Norse and Romance, survives only in legal formulas and Channel Island dialects. The people who remember them are historians, tourists, and the occasional schoolchild forced to memorize the date 1066. But the structures endure, the walls hold, the words persist.
The Normans vanished into the peoples they conquered, but every time you walk past a castle wall, speak a word borrowed from French, or read a legal document that echoes feudal logic, you are standing in their shadow. They did not survive, they became everything.